Get your kids out of public school. I do not say this because all public school teachers are bad. They're not. There is tens of thousands of absolutely wonderful public school teachers and some administrators and principals and everything else doing their best to try to make a broken system work. But it is effectively a broken system. This was set up based off of an 18th century Prussian model in order to make really, really good conscripts and factory workers. And it is a mass production approach to education, which means it's not interested in the individual goals of your child. It is at this point interested in sustaining itself as it is. And you know this because anytime there's any sort of adjustment to try to make substantive change to the system, the advertising you get is not, oh, well, that's a really good point and something we should consider. Or, well, we think we have a different way of achieving that. No, it's you hate teachers and you want to defund public school. You don't want poor people to learn, right? It's immediately ad hominem attack. Immediately ad hominem attack. The other thing that we need to keep in mind is that if you look at our university system, so you want to teach in a public school, got to have a degree, right? Got to have an education degree. Our university system overall is on a good day about 70-30 leftist to conservative or libertarian. On a bad day, it's more like 90-10. And in the education departments of every school, it's more like 95-5. And what I mean by that, and James Lindsay has actually done a really, really good job of talking about this in his book called The Marxification of Education. If you look at what's being emphasized within education right now, it's hideous. We're at a point right now where there is such power within that system in order to maintain the status quo, in order to just argue for more funding, but to never do any sort of substantive change that would correct some of the things that we all saw during COVID. That I think at this point it has gotten almost openly hostile. And you see this with some of just the speeches that are given from like the American Federation of Teachers. And the advocacy that they do. They are actively involved in political ideological pursuits. And so to say, if you're someone that believes in free markets, if you're someone that believes in property rights, if you're someone that believes that, U.S. history with all of its flaws has overall been a pretty good step in the right direction by compared to world history. You are going to increasingly get a core of teachers that were not taught that. They were taught the exact opposite of that. And so the worldview that you're trying to teach your kids is going to be in many cases directly opposed within the school system that you are paying taxes for and will be arrested if you don't send your kids to unless you can afford an alternative. So I would just tell you right now, you need to look really hard at what is being taught to your kids. I always hear about socialization. I don't want to hear about socialization when we got kids getting raped in public school bathrooms. And this is something in Virginia that we have really dealt with. I don't want to hear about it when we've got overt political indoctrination. We've got overt indoctrination on things like critical theory, queer theory, things that do not need to be discussed in the 9th grade, especially when you have kids that can't even get basic math and reading scores down. We don't need pornographic materials within our public school libraries. I'm sorry, this whole idea that we just want to ban books. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, we had a bill. Here's what the bill did. It didn't ban a single book, not one. Didn't remove any. Didn't do anything. It said you're going to have a list on your public school, in order to address some of the concerns that parents have brought up, you're going to have a list of books that feature things like this. And then we offered 6 examples. One was a graphic novel of a 10-year-old girl being raped by an elderly man. One was depictions of these are visual depictions, right? We're not talking about a Pulitzer Prize thing where it's kind of like, no. Visual depictions in books. You're going to have a list that tells parents these books are in there, and then you're going to give them the option to not let their kid check it out. Not one vote, not one crossover vote. So no, this stuff is going on within your public school system. So what I would say is this. I think one of the biggest keys going forward, if you want to see the sort of country where we believe in property rights, we believe in free markets, we believe in individual liberty, we believe that the government is supposed to play an important yet limited role within our lives, you're going to need to take more responsibility over your kids' education. Now, if you keep them in public school because you can't afford an alternative, understand you're still going to have to be very, very actively involved, because while you can delegate, the authority to educate your kids, you cannot delegate the responsibility for it. They're your kids. And I think it's one of the single most important things people can do is play a far more active role. So if you can get out of them, I would. That's just the reality. I'm going to tell people what I believe is the truth. If you can't get out of them, you're going to have to play a far more active role because I think they are increasingly designed to indoctrinate rather than actually set your children up for economic or social success.
Okay, so just to get this straight, you're saying that this was a bill or something, an idea that was you were presumably trying to pass, which said that parents should be provided with a list of books and they can then decide if their child can check it out.
Delegate Tim Anderson had the bill. He listed 6 of some of the most graphic books that had been in Virginia public school system, not theoretically, not could be, were. And he said, these are the sort of books, and we came up with a certain guideline. These are the sort of books, they just have to inform parents that they're there. Not one Here was the crazy part. As he's describing this and he's showing pictures, we had to dismiss the student pages. We have student pages that serve in the Virginia House of Delegates and Senate. They're like 13, 14 years old. And they sit up there and they'll run and they'll bring you bills or they'll bring you stuff like that. We requested that the speaker dismiss the student pages so that we could actually show what we were going to show. And he went through and he read off what it said. He showed the pictures of it. He did all of it. I had a Democrat colleague, one who I actually respect quite a bit, even though we disagree a lot. He goes, Nick, I think it was horribly, just went beyond all decorum for Tim to show those pictures on the floor of the House of Delegates. Like, those are pictures from books in public school libraries. If it's inappropriate here in a room full of adults and legislators who actually have the decision-making power over these things, why is it appropriate in a public school library? And by the way, we weren't even going to remove them. We were just going to let parents know they were there. Why was that inappropriate? Because, well, Nick, nobody wants those books in the public school system. I said, well, somebody certainly does because they're there. I said, but I'll tell you what, we'll see when we have the vote.
Who put the books there?
A lot of it is based off of individual school librarians and the American Library Association. By the way, you want to read some really scary quotes? Read what a certain head of the American Library Association said that she thinks the role of the libraries and the responsibilities are, because it does not increase literacy. I mean, you want to talk about like dedicated. Every time I say this, people are always like, oh, Red's scared. The woman has come right out and said that she's a Marxist and that she believes she has a certain ideological responsibility. And that using that position to be able to foster that and to foster those ideas is very important to her. Okay, maybe you like that, maybe you don't. But you don't get to tell me it's not happening.
Are kids actually going to the library and reading books? Is that I feel like it's
I never
went to I would pick up the National Geographic books, like with all the butterflies and the reptiles, but I was like 3rd grade and look at the dinosaurs. I mean, that was about it.
You probably didn't have porn in your public school library, but I'll tell you what, if you were a teenage boy and you came across some, yeah, you might be going to the library
Maybe
more.
I did, but like I wouldn't know.
Here's what it comes down to. It's not even a question of because I've heard some people say, well, you know, if you want to ban it for your children, you can ban it, but you don't get to ban it from mine. Like, okay, but it's in a public school library. Our tax dollars paid for it. Is there really no realm where we can say, look, whether you like it, whether you don't like it, this probably isn't appropriate for a 13-year-old, especially a 13-year-old that we need to stay focused on, I don't know, learning how to read, right? Or being able to do basic mathematics or finish their AP courses. Like, why is this in here? Why is this taking up time? And then to see the pushback to where, well, if you want to do this, you're a book banner or you're a book burner or you're a fascist. Let me get this straight. I'm a fascist because I don't want tax dollars spent on openly pornographic materials in a public school library. Really? I'm a fascist because I want parents to actually be aware that this sorts of material is in your public school library. That makes me a fascist?
Why do you think no one voted on that? What do you think?
Well, our side did. We voted for it unanimously. Okay. We got it out of the House. So not a single Democrat voted for it. We got it out of the House, went to the Senate, and it died in a subcommittee. And most of the people that voted in the subcommittee voted by proxy.
So it's because you didn't have funding in there, though. That's probably why.
Yeah, right? Yeah,
so
we had funding.
Why don't the citizens make the decision for something like that?
Well, so
because I'm sure if you like did by poll, it would be overwhelmingly like, yes, please let us know, you know, if there are certain books that could be explicit that we could then restrict our child, so we have control over what our child can read in school.
Depending on your state, your local school board actually can have the authority to do things like that, and your local school board can be very so the local school boards in Virginia are actually quite powerful. There's a lot of things that the Virginia Department of Education does that is just what they call like guidance or recommendations, but they're not impositions, because our state constitution gives a great deal of authority to the localities, which I don't think is a bad thing. And so that's the place where the parents can have the biggest voice. Here's going to always be the problem, though. This is my other problem with government-run education. You're forcing all of us to pay for it, right? And so even if you do have some sort of impact at the local level, we're still being all compelled to pay for it, even if we don't like it. And part of the problem is that when you increasingly give the government more control over areas of our life, especially areas as essential as education, you are ultimately going to end up with greater inefficiencies because of the way government spends money, which we discussed ad nauseum. But you're also going to end up with agendas. You're going to end up with political agendas in your classroom that you probably don't want. And even the people right now that might be happy with the particular agenda, okay, cool. Are you going to be happy if Trump's the one setting it? So is the solution for us to fight endlessly about which side of the political spectrum is going to control education? Or should the fight be, how do we empower parents to be able to get their kids education? Because we could do things like individual vouchers. We could do things like education savings accounts. Let me put it this way. For everyone that has watched this and said, Nick's just an anti-education, zealot. We all agree education is important. Can we also agree that eating is important? Okay. So let's say 100 years ago, the government got together and said, you know what? Eating is so incredibly important that it cannot be left to the private sector. There's no way it can be left to the private sector because otherwise poor people would starve to death. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to open up 10,000 government grocery stores. And you're not going to actually pick your grocery store. You're going to be assigned a grocery store based off of your address. Now, when you go into the grocery store, you're not actually going to select your groceries. Your groceries are going to be selected by nutritional experts that the government approves of. And they're going to decide what your grocery bag looks like for your family based off of whatever the newest data is on caloric intake and things like that. Now, if you don't like something in your grocery bag, no problem. You're just going to have to show up to a lot of meetings, either at the local level or the state level or potentially the federal level, in order to try to convince them to put something else in your bag, while all the people that currently have stuff in your bag are going to deploy lobbyists in order to make sure that your bag never changes, right? Oh, by the way, none of the employees working at this government grocery store will ever be rewarded financially off of their ingenuity, creativity, or work ethic. They will be rewarded based off of seniority. Does anybody think that would be an effective, efficient, or pleasant place to get your groceries? Every time I ask that question, everybody says resentfully, absolutely not. That would be horrible. It's exactly what we did with the public school system. You are assigned a government school based off of your address. You have little to no say over the curriculum that your children are issued. If you do have a problem with what's going on, you're going to have to go through a lengthy political battle in order to try to change any of it, and it will probably be a minuscule change if the bureaucracy doesn't like the change. And none of your teachers are rewarded based off of genuine creativity, work ethic, or ingenuity. They're rewarded based off of their seniority within a government system.
I thought the school system is rewarded based on test scores. Like overall, they might get more funding if the test scores are higher, right?
Or it goes the opposite, right? You got lower test scores, so you need more funding. The reason why you have lower test scores is because you didn't have enough funding. So all public schools in America have three primary funding streams. Usually about anywhere from 40 to 50% comes from local property taxes, right? So wealthier areas tend to have more funding for education. Then you have about another maybe 40 to 50% coming from the state level, and they have various indexes in order to determine what that looks like. And then you have the remaining, like anywhere from 9 to 10% coming from federal funds that are usually dedicated toward specific programs. And then you will have local authority, state authority, and then federal authority insofar as you want the federal dollars for certain programs. So that's the mechanism that you're working with. So yeah, in some cases, you could theoretically have a state that would give a school more funding if it's doing really, really well. But more often than not, and I sit on the education committee in Virginia, the argument that you're going to hear is, well, this school is failing because you have underfunded it. And then you look at it, you're like, wait a second, this school is getting more funding than other schools that are outperforming it. So it's got to be more than the funding. Now, if you really want to get pissed off, go look at the share of funding within public education from 1970 to today, and go look at how much of it has actually gone to administrative bloat within your school system. The administrative bloat has far outpaced teacher pay, anything else. And it certainly hasn't led, all this additional funding hasn't led to drastically improved test scores. And then you can even ask the question, are test scores really the best way to solve it? Like, I have a real heart for, I saw somebody the other day and I wish I could have memorized it. He did a beautiful job, but he basically said he had ADHD and he had dyslexia. But the way he described it was very, he goes, I have ADHD, which means I can focus on multiple independent things at once. He goes, I have dyslexia, which means I see things in an incredibly unique way that other people's can't. Most people don't see ADHD or dyslexia that way. They see it as disadvantages. I think a lot of the reason why we see certain things as disadvantages is because we have a school system that tells you to go in, sit down, shut up for 6 hours a day, and engage in standardized testing in order to determine whether or not you've, encapsulated and mastered the subject matter. Yeah, you put an 8-year-old boy in that situation, you're probably going to have some problems. In fact, you're probably going to have disciplinary issues. You're probably going to have a lot of things that are disruptive for the class, and you can certainly categorize those as problems for that model. But you take that same boy, you put him into a different learning environment, all of a sudden he thrives. And wasn't it Einstein that said, a fish will think it's stupid if you judge its intelligence by its ability to climb a tree? Again, now let me say something complimentary about the people within the public school system. Trying to mass produce public education for tens of millions of people is incredibly difficult. But I think we need to start asking the question, instead of, well, how do we improve this model, which I believe is fundamentally flawed? I think it's about time to start asking questions is, are these flaws so fundamental, and is there a better way to do this that will actually create a far more individualized educational experience? Because I can tell you from personal experience, operating with co-ops, tutors, and then sitting on an education committee where I'm looking at the data for this stuff, one of the greatest things that arrived from homeschools, we didn't have a fraction of the resources and assets that the public school system did with respect to what we could provide for our kids. But when my kid didn't understand a particular topic, I didn't make all my other kids stop until they caught up. They were all able to go forward and develop as fast as they can within a particular strength. I didn't have to stick with the curriculum that wasn't working for them and just hope that it would get better. I could change the curriculum. I could customize it to them. When they got to a certain age within high school and they'd gone through that basic learning, right? You got to know basic math. You got to learn how to read. You got to learn basic English comprehension. You have to do these things no matter what your profession is, no matter what you want to do. But we got to a point where one day I remember my oldest daughter just being so frustrated and upset with a subject matter. I think she was taking Algebra 2 at the time. She was a sophomore in high school and she was miserable. She was hating every minute of it. And I said, what do you want to do? And she goes, these are the categories that I have interest in. I said, you know what? None of those require Algebra 2. So why don't we focus your education on something that will actually be beneficial to something that you would like to do, that is both intellectually stimulating for you and financially viable? Why don't we focus on that? All of a sudden, learning went from this horrible thing that she couldn't stand to something that was exciting because it was customized toward her objectives. We didn't have to be millionaires to do that. It isn't as difficult as it's made out to be. And in fact, I think we're increasingly seeing an expert class that is constantly trying to convince us that we're too stupid to do things that have been done for centuries. So I would just encourage people, as angry as I might have made you saying all this, just take a look into it. Because to your point, when you were talking about access to information and things like that, it has never been easier. It has never been easier. And I do think ultimately it's going to be the thing that saves us. Because I don't want a generation of Americans thinking that the most important thing that they will do in their lives is vote. Like the thing that will ultimately decide whether their business succeeds or failures is who's in politics. That's not a free country. I think, honestly, the most unique and beautiful thing about this country, the reason why people risked life and limb to get here and still do, it's not because you get to vote for politicians every 2, 4, and 6 years. It's because up until this point in history, we were one of the very, very few places on earth where if you genuinely applied yourself, you could create a life and be relatively certain that a dictator, a bureaucrat, an aristocrat wasn't going to come in and take it all away from you because you were the wrong class or the wrong race or the wrong religion. And that's what's so beautiful about it, right? It's that ability to seize opportunity in a way that typically has not existed throughout time and space. And that is ultimately what is at stake. And so I told somebody once, they're like, what do you want to be known for in politics? I said, look, I'm very aware of the fact that 2 minutes after I leave politics, most people forget I was ever there. I want to have a good relationship with my family. I want my wife and kids to be proud of who I was and what I did and know that I was there for them. Insofar as I work within government, my goal ultimately is to make government so small and yet so efficient at what it's supposed to do that nobody has to worry on a day-to-day basis on whether it's going to come in and crush their lives. And that's still what I hold out hope for.